Okay, in this video we're going to be talking about white balance, and I'm filming here in my little Garudio or garage studio, and I'm going to show you some examples of taking photographs and how white balance affects that. Now essentially white balance is the camera's attempt to get accurate color so that the whites are pure white, the greys are pure grey and the blacks pure black in your photographs. So it's trying to get the correct color without any color cast. Now with your camera you can actually set it to auto white balance mode, and quite often that does the trick. And in most lighting circumstances, setting it to auto will actually get the correct color balance and the correct color in your images so that the objects are the accurate color. But understanding a little bit more about white balance will help you in those situations where you've taken a photograph and the correct color isn't coming out, and you want to be able to know what's going on so you can fix that problem. And you find that outdoors the auto white balance does really well, but sometimes indoor lighting can be a bit tricky. I want to give you a quick overview of why there needs to be white balance. And the reason is different lighting has different color tinges to it. So for instance, if you're outdoors and you have direct sunlight, that has a certain color to it. It's mostly white, but it has a certain color hue to it, and in the case of sunlight it's considered a cooler color. So on the other hand, if you go indoors, most light fixtures like regular light bulbs, which is incandescent bulbs, have a more orangey kind of warmer tint to that kind of lighting. So under different circumstances, different objects are going to look a little bit different according to how much color there is in that lighting and what kind of color that is. And then you get fluorescent lights, and they can range from a little bit cooler than regular light bulbs, and then you can get all the way up to daylight fluorescents, which are very similar to the sunlight. And you can even get ones that are even cooler still. So to give you a quick background, a visible light is a really small section of what's called the electromagnetic spectrum, and that goes all the way from radio waves with lower frequencies, and then microwaves, and then you go up into the infrared range, and then higher frequencies you go into visible light, and that starts off with red and then orange and yellow, and as you increase frequency you get to green, and then you head into the blues, and then beyond blue you go into the violet range, and then you start going out of the visible spectrum again into ultraviolet, and beyond ultraviolet you go into X-rays and gamma rays. What happens is if certain objects are at a certain temperature, they give off a certain wavelength of light, and cooler objects will give off more red light, and then as it gets hotter and hotter, it eventually starts giving off more blue light. So when we're talking about our actual light sources, like a light bulb, the light bulb is not burning as hot as the sun, so it actually produces a redder light, and then as you get to the sun produces more blue wavelengths, so it's a cooler light. So although they all look pretty much white, there's different tinges. And you'll notice too, if you're in a room and you have a regular light bulb in a lamp, it gives off quite a yellowy, warm orange light. And then if you switch that off and you put on a fluorescent light, like you get in offices, you'll find that that's a lot cooler. It's more of a pure white source, really, less orange and red in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some examples quick of how that works. So I've got a few objects here. Now white's not always pure white either. Like there's different things that are slightly different tinges. Like some things will be a slightly warmer white, there'll be more red in them, and some things will be bluer white. So here I have an example of just a few objects: grey object, something with black and red and blue, and then two different white objects as well as some white paper. So I'm going to set it to auto white balance just to show you what that can do. And we'll take a quick shot of that with auto. So there we go, auto's done a fairly good job. The lighting in this room now is, I'm actually lit with fluorescent lights, so it's closer to sunlight rather than regular light bulb. Now if you're finding that auto white balance isn't doing the trick, these cameras also have modes where you can actually set the white balance to the conditions you're in. So for instance, you can set it from auto to sunlight, which is this little sun icon, or shade. Now shade generally is a little cooler than sunlight because you're getting some of the blue from the sky, but you're not getting as much direct sun, so that's actually slightly cooler looking light or bluer light. Then you get cloudy, which is not as blue as shady light because you're not getting that reflected blue from the sky, but it's a little bit cooler than direct sun. And then there's the incandescent or the light bulb, and then you get fluorescent light and then flash, and flash is usually somewhere close to sunlight. But the idea is you can actually set it to what you're using, and sometimes that can be more accurate than the auto. But before I go any further, let me show you what happens if I set it to the wrong light. I'm going to set it to indoor incandescent light, and I'm going to take a shot of this again. So this is set to a light bulb, even though we're being lit by a fluorescent bulb. And then what happens is it comes out really blue. So it's expecting to be lit by a warmer light, which is a regular light bulb, but it's actually lit by fluorescent lights. So the resulting photo ends up coming out way too cool or too blue. So then if I set it over to, just to give you an idea of shade, which is one of the coolest kind of lights, and then I take a photo, you'll notice it's a little warm. So in this case it's expecting cooler light, but it's not that cool, so the image comes out warmer. These light presets for the white balance, like fluorescent light, incandescent light, shade, sun, flash, those settings are actually based on what's called a color temperature. And the temperature of light is in Kelvin. And you'll notice on your camera that there is actually a mode where you can set the light according to the Kelvin level. So it's a K in your camera, and if you set it to that, the K on your white balance setting. So if you set it to Kelvin, that allows you to actually put in the color temperature that you want. So what happens with Kelvin is you can take a photograph of your subject, and then if you feel, okay, it's come out a little bit too warm, then you can compensate for that by changing the setting. So I can go back into the menu. I can set that Kelvin level to exactly what I want. And what it is warmer lighting is around the 3000 level. So very warm lighting, like fireplace lighting, would be like around just under 3000. So if I set it to that and I take a photo, it comes out way too blue. It's expecting really warm light and it wasn't that warm, so you end up with a much cooler image. And so now if I change that Kelvin level somewhere in the middle range, which is direct sunlight, which is about 5200 Kelvin. So set it to that, and then I take a photo. And that's fairly close. That's fairly close to what the actual color should be in this image. So now if I take it up to the color temperature up to all the way as high as it can go, which is 8000, well, this lets me go all the way to 10,000, which would be very cool shade conditions. Shade's usually around 8,000, but this I'll set it to 10 to show you. So it's expecting really cool light now, and I'll take a photograph, and the image comes out way too warm because it's expecting much cooler light, and the light was actually warmer, so that's the effect it has. So the good thing about Kelvin though is you can take a photograph And if it's a little warm or a little cool, you can just go up or down accordingly. So if your photograph comes out a little too cool, then you can just set the temperature a little higher. And if it comes out a little too warm, then you set the color temperature to a little lower, and then it'll even out. The real benefit of having Kelvin is if you're shooting with more than one camera, like if you're doing an event where you have 2 or 3 photographers taking the photographs, you can actually set each camera to a certain Kelvin setting for your whatever the environment is, whether it's in a church or outdoors. So you can set it to a known Kelvin, like let's say you set it to 3000, and you set all your cameras to 3000, so the color will be the same on all your cameras because the white balance is set the same. So it's really handy for those kind of situations. Now another thing these cameras have, DSLRs have, is an option to shift the white balance. So if you're in a mode where either auto or one of the other modes where you've chosen fluorescent or shade or any of those preset modes, and you take a photo of the object. So in this case I'm going to set it to shade. So I'll take a photograph. So it's expecting quite cool lighting and the images come out too warm. So I can go into the menu system and I can choose white balance shift. And this has axes. It has a blue to amber axis and it has a green to magenta. So in this case I want to cool my image down, so I can use the joystick. Now you have to look in your camera manual to find out how yours works. It usually works with the scroll button or the joypad here or some kind of joystick. So I can send it all the way over to the blue side, so that's going to make the image cooler or more blue. And I set that, and then I take a shot again. And you can see, compared to the image before, that was warmer and now we've got cooler light. So that's handy if you've used a setting and you just want to warm up the image a little. It's a way of just warming it up or cooling it down depending on how your photographs come out. Or if it's a little too green, you can pull it down the magenta scale and bring a little bit more warmth and remove some of the green from your image. So that's a really handy feature. The white balance shift or bracketing, and once again, just like the other camera I showed you, you have green, magenta and blue amber scale. So that way you can shift, make the image a little warmer, moving it to the amber scale, or down into the magenta amber will really warm up your image. Or alternatively, you can go over to the blue scale if you want to cool down your image. And so very handy, the white balance shift mode, if you just need to warm up or cool down your image. So that's that menu. And to actually set it, you'd warm it up and then you'd hit set, and that white balance correction is set in there, ready for your next photograph. So I'm going to show you some examples on the computer of correct white balance and incorrect white balance. See, what you want to do is when you're taking photographs, you want to have it fairly accurate because there's limits to how much you can adjust the white balance on the computer.
Okay, here we have Trivial Barncat. Now this is correct white balance, and here's an incorrect setting of tungsten or indoor lighting, and here's a incorrect setting of shade, which shows you a much warmer image because it's expecting it to be a lot bluer light. And our next example, here we have a more subtle example. So here we have the correct white balance, and here we have fluorescent setting, which is not a lot lower in Kelvin if you look at the Kelvin values. And finally we have daylight, which is a little higher in temperature, so it results in a warmer image because it's expecting bluer light as well. So most times you want to get accurate white balance, but you can actually play with the white balance to get some nice creative effects. So in this example I've turned the Kelvin all the way down to 2150, so it's expecting a really warm lighting, and it's an outdoor scene, so it's basically blown out the blues, made a real cool image. But it's kind of cool because it has that like electric blue effect. And then if you turn up the contrast, and I turned up the exposure a little, you get this image that's quite artistic. So it just gives you one example of how you can play with the white balance to create some kind of a different artistic look.
So in our next video we're going to look at, I'm going to talk about white balance bracketing, which is another option for trying to get accurate white balance, and custom white balance, which is a way of getting perfect white balance in your particular situation. Because sometimes you may have mixed light or unusual lighting circumstances, and custom white balance really gives you pretty accurate color for those situations. So jump into that next video and learn how to do custom white balance and white balance bracketing. Thank you.